Izzy Johnson's reflective journals from Monday the 16th of November to Thursday the 19th of November. So on Monday the 16th, we looked at the introduction of all the individual fairies and both of the duchesses for Sleeping Beauty, our production of Sleeping Beauty. We did this so that we could get section 1 pieced together, not finalised but pieced together, and start looking at the different movement styles and also look at how we could incorporate all the fairies and the duchesses together to make it clear which character was which. Some ideas I did contribute. I worked with my partner Grace, and I contributed ideas that we'd used from prior material, prior movement content to incorporate into our introduction. So we'd each do a solo, and then we used some existing content to create the next part of our duet, and also incorporate the fairies into our duet, so that people aren't just standing off stage or, just standing in place. We're going to show how the audience sees it with mostly like gestures and facial expressions, and all the different kinds of techniques, alignment, posture, maybe even some contact work between me and Grace. We're also going to show it through our outfit. So I play the more butch, if you will, female in the couple between me and Grace plays the more feminine. So I'm going to be wearing pants, and Grace is most likely going to be wearing a dress. And, we just kind of worked as a team, along with all the people who were playing the fairies. We worked with them to come up with different kinds of ideas of how we could incorporate everyone, how we'd use props and how we'd get the baby, like using a prop baby from one side of the room to the other. Some of the research that I did was looking into different movement styles that powerful black women had like during the 1900s to 20th century, just so that I could get an idea of how people would move then, and also looked at some different kinds of costumes, because while we want to portray the idea of being in a same-sex couple, we did notice that there wasn't that much of a talk about homosexuality in 1904, in those earlier days. So it was difficult for us to kind of, get into that headspace of, right, this is what we're going to do, because we didn't really know what we were going to do. So our teacher's feedback, which was a really good thing, was to just put more energy into it and maybe take a look at our mood boards that we made on our character, and just kind of look into that and see where we were going with that, and see if our characters and see if our movement matched our characters, and see if we were losing our characters, to see if maybe looking at our mood boards would help, to have a group discussion about who our characters were, and really just work on how we were going to progress and make everything better. Some of the problems, one of the main problems that we encountered was with the music. We didn't know how to move around the music, because the music is a lot of different R&B tracks but put into classical music, so using classical instruments, and that was really difficult because we found ourselves not really knowing how to put our kind of artistic style and our dance movement into that music. And I think another thing that we also struggled with was coming up with, movements that would suit our characters, because I think the majority of us, I know I certainly did, lost our characters and didn't really feel like we had our characters together. And I think the next big step was to maybe even get into costume or start looking at costume and just kind of get into that headspace of knowing what our characters are, knowing who we are, knowing the kind of time period, and knowing who the other characters are around us. Because if we didn't, then that potentially would have harmed us along the way, and we potentially could have come out with no kind of like guideline for what we were doing next. So in Tuesday's lesson, we went back to looking at Act 1 for Sleeping Beauty, and we looked at piecing together the entrance of the fairies, the introduction of each individual fairy, the Duchess's entrance and introduction, and then also Mara's introduction, Carabosse Maleficent. We did this so that section 1 wouldn't look very bare, because all that we had was the entrance of the fairies to open it, and then we didn't really know where everything was going because we had bits of music that didn't have any movement to it. We didn't know where Mara's solo was going to come into. We also had to look at the cursing of the baby Aurora, and how the parents would react, and how the fairies would protect her, and how Count Lilac would then change the curse so that she sleeps for 100 years and so that she doesn't die on her 16th birthday. Some of the things that were contributed were to have Mara's solo at the end, so that it seems like a big celebration, and then it gets ruined by Mara, and then that's when she curses the baby. The audience will see that through mostly facial expressions and characters, obviously knowing that the fairies are going to be in fairy dresses, in very light colours, and then the duchesses are going to be in different outfits, very bold, very bright, very extravagant perhaps. And then Mara's character, is a very evil character, so through gesture and movement we'll see her character come into play. Some of the research, like I said on Monday, was just kind of researching, for my character at least, looking at my mood board, looking at pictures that would fit the description of an extravagant and extremely powerful female role and a powerful ethnic role. It was difficult because there's only so many photos that you can take and so many things that you can look at. But some of our feedback was to just practice and try and introduce some form of canon somewhere or something, just so that it looks a bit more polished. One of the problems we encountered was just the last bit, trying to figure out how we'd move the baby around the stage and how it wouldn't look in a silly way. And I think that the next thing that we need to look at is how the baby is cursed. Maybe look at potentially changing how we move the baby so that it looks not silly and looks like we're actually scared for the baby Aurora. On Wednesday, the 18th of November, we decided to look at the transition from Act 2 to Act 3. So this is when Aurora has started to fall asleep, has gone into a 100-year sleep. And we wanted to look at, because me and a couple of other people suggested this idea, that we go through each of the decades. So from 1920 up until 2020, current day, 100 years of her sleeping. We wanted to look at the different eras, the different dance styles, everything that would have been going on around her while she was sleeping, which was a really fun concept because it gave us a chance to introduce many different styles that we wouldn't have usually used during the Act 1 and Act 2. like the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s, because, you know, we would have used Charleston in Act 2, and then in 2020 we would have used more up-to-date music, more up-to-date dance styles. So it gave us an opportunity to look at different dance styles and add character to them, to break away from our character, and to really get involved in different types of dance. So we were all given different decades, and me and my partner Libby were tasked with the early 2000s, the noughties, and we were given the songs Soldier Boy and Teach Me How to Dougie, which was a really fun concept, because it gave us that chance to look at that kind of grimy aspect of dance. So it wasn't exactly hip hop and it wasn't exactly street, it was that kind of in the middle that needed a lot of attitude to it. And then when we performed it, some of the feedback that we got back was really good, that we had good energy, but we needed to keep our eyes up, so keep our eye level elevated. This is just to show the audience that time is passing, but not doing it as in just having a clock in the background ticking away, to do it in a fun, different way that involves us, still moving, still getting active, and perhaps even making the dance longer so that we've got more of a proper performance in there. Yeah, it was a really fun concept, and me and my friend Libby, we researched into early noughties, maybe attire, so clothing, and then obviously the styles and the different music and the different musicians back then, and we looked at having really baggy and oversized clothing, but having that really cheesy kind of attitude to us, that really cheesy noughties attitude, the noughties young boys, how they used to get about in massive gold chains, the big stereotypes that were around then, and just having fun with it. And we didn't really encounter any problems, because it was easy enough to get the movement down and memorize it. So yeah, and I think our plan is just to kind of clean it up a bit, make sure that we're both in the same places, make sure that our timing's on point. And I was also tasked with choreographing another 2000s part, so more up to date, 2015, 16 and stuff like that. So I'm really hoping to introduce some different kind of movements into that, and some more up-to-date modern movements, just so that the people know that it's gone from 1920s up until current day. And then Aurora obviously wakes up in Act 3, and Act 3 is completely different. But yeah, the next steps are kind of just to refine that, clean that up, and make sure that everything is perfect within that, so that it's realistic enough and it tells the audience what's going on. On Thursday, the 19th of November, all we did really was looking at Act 1 and then Act 2, and really just cleaning everything up in them, so that we knew that we at least had some solid material that was clean enough to be performed. Act 2 we'd already gone over multiple times, and we knew what we were doing with Act 2. We were fairly confident with Act 2 in the sense of we knew the movement material, we knew everything that we needed to do, we knew the kind of styles, the 1920s, Prohibition era, and it was really just about cleaning up Act 2, making sure that everybody understood what was going on during Act 2, and then going back to Act 1 and kind of just looking at mainly the entrance of the fairies, and then looking back at the solos, the introduction of each fairy and the duchesses, myself and Grace, just so that we knew that we had that basis for that. Instead of having it completely polished, at least we knew that we had some form of, ground to stand on when it came to looking at what we had got done and what we hadn't. We didn't really need to do any research for this, because we already had all the necessities that we needed, the information of 1920s prohibition, moonshine, speakeasies, the promiscuity of women in that time, the dance style. And then in Act 1, while we didn't really do that much insight into 1904, I still looked at my mood board, I still looked at strong black women, and it just helped us to go through that so that it was fresh in our mind and that we knew that we wouldn't forget it anytime soon. We didn't really encounter any problems. It was just kind of keeping on repeating everything that we knew so that we had it in our head and that we wouldn't get lost with it, because it's really important to keep all of that movement in your head so that when it comes to performing, you know how to perform it. Not just that you know the movements, it's just how you know how to perform it, and kind of the energy. You need to keep the energy up. So our next steps is to just get everything polished, especially Act 2, because we spent most time on Act 2. So if we get Act 2 finished, polished and out of the way, that gives us time to focus on Act 1 and even potentially move on to Act 3 and see the story in Act 3 and where we need to go from there, and then looking at the ending and hopefully having a finished product within a couple of weeks of hard work.